Welcome once again to the latest episode of Under the Macroscope, our weekly podcast in which I catch up with Jabir Sadawala, Chief Strategist of Skybound Capital based in the London office, and we review some of the macro themes affecting global economies over the past week or so. Now, Jabir, in almost every podcast of the first quarter of 2021, the subject of digital currencies emerged and it's become an increasing talking point. And just this past week, Sweden conducted a first official study on digital currencies and adds now to the work that a number of banks are doing globally around digital currencies. What do you see in this?
Yeah, hi, Matt. I think it's a fascinating first stage to this study because the conclusions they've come up with are essentially one of, well, hold on, let's just wait and see and take a steady approach on this. So if you look at some of the conclusions they've reached, first of all, they've said it's going to take almost certainly a lot longer to enact regulation than they'd initially thought, and that the current pilot scheme won't be finished till early next year. So that immediately kind of implies that they're stepping back on the sense of emergency here. Secondly, and this is really interesting, they've said that it's essential to understand what the e-krona, as it's being labeled, needs to accomplish in terms of uses and expectations. Now, that also echoes something that Fed Chair Jerome Powell was talking about, because he implied also that, guys, what's the hurry here? Let's get the right thing first. And then thirdly, and this is really vital, because we've spoken about this before in the world of cryptos and what makes them acceptable. They made it clear that they need to establish a new legal framework before it can be used. So these are all very significant points. They're not saying that they're not going to carry on with it, but they're just saying we need to understand. So implied in all of this, what they're saying is, look, we have a currency and people seem to be happy with the medium of exchange, i.e. cash. They totally accept that cash's role is diminishing in society. We all know that, especially with the pressure to raise more and more taxation. And, if you can eliminate tax, you also help directly and indirectly with anti-money laundering as well. But what they're saying is, let's get it right. That's the main thing. There's no reason to embark on such a project just yet. So their central bank, the Riksbank, will be responsible for the issuance and redemption of the central bank digital currency, CBDC. And the participants involved in the framework will be the banks, the payment firms, and so on. And in the final instance, it'll be politicians who decide how it all shapes up. But very telling study.
Do you see a sense here, though, that there is this acknowledgement that the use of cash in circulation is diminishing, and we've seen it diminish greatly over the past 12 months for very obvious reasons, but that the alternative has been subjected to some pretty stringent scrutiny over the past year, and it's held up, that there is an alternative to cash?
There is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. There is an alternative to cash. And that alternative already exists. We do it through just our banking applications. I think the key deciding factor here is, what do we actually get out of the digital currency? If they can really establish what the answer to that is, not just, I'm not just talking the Sweden concept, but just universally, then I think we've got a basis upon which to pursue this. And for that, the banking I do, for instance, in the UK, when I transfer money, or indeed receive money, there are no payment charges. I don't incur any charges. Now, I appreciate that it's not necessarily the same everywhere across the world. So we need a level playing field. But I am not incurring additional costs for my banking activity. So unless digital FX is doing something incredibly unique, the message that's coming through this is, we're quite happy to carry on. Yes, there is a burden of physical notes and coins, but there is an alternative to that, and we already have it in operation.
Another topic that you highlighted during the past week, and also very much on a global basis, was the possibility of a global tax rate. Tell us more.
Yeah, so this is really, I think this is one of the best initiatives that's come out of the Biden administration in such an incredibly short space of time. And and it's real as well. This is not just a flash in the pan idea. You can see some serious thought has been put into this, and it's been fully endorsed by the likes of Janet Yellen, who I think is significantly behind this. Also, her deputy, I think his name is Adam Mayo. He's emphasized this as well. It's already been given the thumbs up in principle by other countries such as France. So you can see the supporter base comprising those who have high corporation tax rates, and already the complainers are those with low taxation rates, such as Ireland, for instance. So essentially what the plan is suggesting is that we have a global minimum corporation tax rate, a global minimum corporation tax rate of 21%. Now, the Joe Biden administration has made it clear that they want to raise their own corporation tax rate to 28%, because that's one of the key ways in which they're going to fund their expenditure program. And plus, they don't think that that's going to put American companies at any real significant disadvantage. And from what I can make out, it's almost like having the system of double taxation treaty in place. So if you have a country that is exporting to another country, they pay their 21%, but and then you settle on the difference. And that's what they're getting at. Now, I think in terms of the long-term benefits here, they're huge, because different corporate accounts. So you always get a big difference with earnings after tax. Well, now you start to eliminate that sort of thing. I also think that in a way, in a quasi form, it removes power from the corporates and hands it back to governments who are effectively working for consumers. And that's got to be a big plus. And overall, I think productivity will rise on the back of this. There have been studies done now about the impact on earnings. I think they're overblown. I mean, the early studies so far actually don't show a major impact. Nothing that the stock market can't ride. But if money goes back into government pockets, then they've got more to spend on initiatives. But it's a very significant move, this, and you can see there's a lot of impetus behind it.
Yeah, it's out there, it's bold. Yeah. Where do you see the most likely resistance to this proposal coming from? What are the barriers to getting it implemented?
Yeah, well, the barriers that have been stated so far is that it's going to have an adverse effect, for instance, on emerging markets, because it will disincentivize foreign direct investment into their countries. Well, I'm not entirely. I mean, I think when people decide on FDI, it's a lot more than taxation. It comes down to politics. It comes down to the ease of doing business. There are many different, The Economist has done quite a lot of work on this in the past. So I don't think it's as clear cut as taxation. And in fact, if you standardize it, then you remove one potential barrier. So that's the first point. The second argument is that it puts the initiative, the bias, back in favor of developed markets. Possibly there might be an element of that. They recoup some of their taxes. But remember, that's where a lot of these companies were born out of in the first place. So I wouldn't necessarily hammer those countries, too hard, because they are only basically claiming back what they would argue is rightfully their own. And the third category is obviously those countries with a very low tax rate. So some of the examples that I mentioned, for instance, like Ireland, that has an incredibly low tax rate, but also within, for instance, the poorer EU countries, such as Hungary and Bulgaria, where you have tax rates of 9% and 10% respectively. those are very low tax rates, but their economies struggle. So I think that's a wider EU issue. I don't think that's specifically down to one particular tax rate.
Well, a fascinating balancing act to be drawn there, and certainly a topic to keep a close eye on in the coming weeks. Jabir, to finish, some sad news. I was speaking to a friend of mine in the UK on Saturday who said that literally programming across all terrestrial television stations had been suspended to pay tribute to Prince Philip after his passing. At a time when the royal family has been under scrutiny, some would say under pressure, but you yourself have said sometimes it's on a person's death you find out just how significant a contribution they have made, and that certainly seems to be the case in the case of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely right, and I think the country's feeling it. The BBC, I just heard this morning, has it put out a page there online where people can come back with their comments. And there have been people who are saying that this is overkill in terms of the media coverage. Maybe not. I have to admit, what I've seen so far, and that includes second and third time round, it's helping the whole thing to sink in more and more. This guy was a legend. He was behind the scenes. He was everything, as our former Prime Minister John Major said. He epitomized the British spirit and remained true to himself. But the one thing he always hated was fuss and bother. He just got on with it. And as I mentioned in my weekly, there's the old saying that behind every great man, there's a great woman. Well, here you had the opposite situation, which goes unnoticed. Behind every great woman, i.e. the Queen, there is a great man, and there is the wider implication here of what sort of impact does this have on the Queen? Because at the end of the day, she could always go home, and there he was as a sounding board. And he never held back, all the coverage is pointing to that. Even when he first came onto the scene, there were big question marks over his suitability. But he he was very direct. He was known for making gaffes, and some of them were obviously quite they did ruffle feathers. But at the end of the day, the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, for instance, what was that all about? It was about helping young people to find confidence and to get them to realize that their potential is right up there, much higher than where they think it is. He always assessed people individually. I think, he wasn't the type to look at anybody based on where they came from or any of that. And he had his, he had his very direct moments as well. But that's what made him what he was. Now he's going to be really missed, I think. And the implications for the royals, it comes out of how well and how quickly the Queen can adjust.
Sad days indeed. As always, Jabir, great to catch up with you. The podcast available on Apple, Spotify, and on the Google podcast platform for Android. So we hope you will subscribe there, and you can also find past editions of Under the Macroscope at www.skyboundcapital.com. Until next time, have a great week.